So I just want to be honest with you all where my heart is this morning and some of the things that I'm bringing to the table. First, as we talked about, it's Advent. And Advent, for many of us, this time of waiting and preparing, it can be a time when we're actually more aware. And so because of that nature of waiting and preparing, it can also be a time where things are a bit more tender. The second thing I bring to the table is, last week I started reading Brené Brown's newest work. It's called Rising Strong. I highly recommend this book. And I bring it to the table this morning. And the third thing is, as you know, there has been this week not just another, but yet another mass shooting in this country. And as you know, what happened the week before that. And it was in our own backyard of Colorado Springs. And so once again, the questions, the conversations, they turn to the big questions, the whys, the wheres. Why is this happening? Why isn't God stopping this? Where is God? Where is culture headed? Where is our world headed? So those are some of the things I bring to the table this morning. Now, in Brené Brown's book, Rising Strong, she has this wonderful phrase that she plays with, and she calls it the messy middle. And I love it. And here's what she's talking about when she talks about the messy middle. And she has some help from Pixar when it comes to this. But she describes it through the form of storytelling, 3 acts. And Act 1 is when the protagonist encounters the adventure, is called into the adventure, and accepts the calling. And then somewhere in Act 1, things start to go awry, like a problem comes about or a conflict arises. And then Act 2, and by the way, if you were in Storyline last year, or if you remember our stories theme from last year, this will sound somewhat familiar. But Act 2, the character, the protagonist, is looking for every comfortable way to deal with this conflict or problem. And finally, he or she sees that there is no comfortable way. You just have to go right through it. You have to go right through the darkness, head on. And then Act 3, the protagonist encounters some sort of redemption or resolution or some sort of light in the darkness. And Brené Brown says, how many of us, how often do we try to escape Act 2? We try to escape the middle, the messy middle. We try to go from adventure, being called into adventure, to redemption, from adventure to resolution, from adventure to light. And we want to skip the hard work down here. She says this is oftentimes the lowest of low for the character. We want to skip this part. It's the part we'd rather not deal with. We want to get straight to the good stuff. But she says if you want transformation of yourself, if you want transformation of the world, you have to go through the messy middle. I think Advent is the messy middle. So we're going to look at a story from Esther, a story about Esther and Mordecai from the book of Esther. A little backstory to Esther. This takes place during the time and during the location of the Persian Empire. During this time, the Jews have been sent into exile and they have been scattered. Many of them are still living in and on the margins of the empire. Now, the king at this time, his name is King Xerxes. Mordecai and Esther are Jewish. Mordecai is Esther's uncle. He has raised her from the time she was a little girl when her parents passed away. Now, King Xerxes, he and all the king's men, they are in the middle of this 6-month drunken feast, and he calls the queen to come in. And I'm simplifying the story, of course. He calls the queen to come in. She says, no, I'm not coming. He says, fine, I don't need you. In fact, you're no longer a queen. I'm going to find a new queen. And they do a search. And he comes across Esther. And Esther, we're told, is more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. And she has something to offer me. So Esther becomes queen. Keep in mind, Mordecai and Esther are concealing their identity. They don't want people to know they're Jewish. This could be very, very dangerous. 5 years pass by. Meanwhile, King Xerxes has hired a sidekick, and his name is Haman. And Haman is absolutely brutal. Haman is bent on destruction. He has a huge ego. When Haman walks into the room, he expects everyone in the room to bow down to him. And on this particular day, Mordecai, he just stands there. He doesn't bow. And Haman says, I'm sorry, is there a problem? Mordecai says, yeah, there's a problem. I'm Jewish. I'm not bowing down to you. I bow to someone else. Oops. Cover blown. Identity is known. Haman says, really? You're Jewish? Well, you are going to die. And not only are you going to die, all of your people, all the Jews are going to be put to death. So Haman comes up with this decree, and he gets it signed by the king, and the thing is moved into motion. All of them are going to die. Here's where we pick up in the story, chapter 4. When Mordecai learned what had been done, he tore his clothes, dressed in mourning clothes, and put ashes on his head. Then he went out into the heart of the city and cried out loudly and bitterly. He went only as far as the king's gate, because it was against the law for anyone to pass through it wearing mourning clothes. At the same time, in every province and place where the king's order and his new law arrived, a very great sadness came over the Jews. They gave up eating and spent whole days weeping and crying out loudly in pain. Many Jews lay on the ground in mourning clothes and ashes. When Esther's female servants and eunuchs came and told her about Mordecai, the queen's whole body showed how upset she was. She sent everyday clothes for Mordecai to wear instead of mourning clothes, but he rejected them. And I'm skipping a little bit in the story. This conversation goes back and forth between Esther and Mordecai. And Mordecai says to her, Esther, you have to act. You have to do something. You have to go before the king and stop this thing. And Esther says, look, you don't understand the way the system works. I can't just go before the king. If I'm not called before the king and I just show up, well, then I could be put to death. That's not the way it works. And so Mordecai responds. When they told Mordecai Esther's words, he had them respond to Esther, don't think for 1 minute that unlike all the other Jews, you'll come out of this alive simply because you are in the palace. In fact, if you don't speak up at this very important time, relief and rescue will appear for the Jews from another place. But you and your family will die. But who knows? Maybe it was for a moment like this that you came to be part of the royal family. Esther sent back this word to Mordecai. Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. They aren't to eat or drink anything for 3 whole days. And I myself will do the same along with my female servants. So she's drawing on her traditions of praying and fasting to go through something hard. Then, even though it's against the law, I will go to the king. And if I am to die, then die I will. So here's the messy middle. Esther says to Mordecai, dude, you have got to get your act together. You've got to stop with all this weird stuff of mourning and weeping and wailing. It's making us look bad. Here, take these everyday clothes and put them on. Be a normal human being, Mordecai. Now, just imagine with me for a moment. If Mordecai says, oh, shucks, Esther, you're right. Let's just act like none of this is happening. Let's ignore this part. Give me the jeans and a polo, and let's go back to life as usual. Mordecai doesn't do that, does he? He says, heck no, I'm not putting on the clothes. I'm staying in the sackcloth and ashes because we're dealing with this. This is happening. Mordecai stays in the messy middle. And then Mordecai says to Esther, don't you think for 1 minute that this thing isn't going to affect you? The palace can't protect you here. This is going to affect you. Mordecai is pulling Esther into the messy middle. And finally, by the end of this part of the story, Esther embraces and engages the messy middle. What does she say? Next slide, please. Esther sent back this word to Mordecai. Go gather all the Jews who are in Susa and tell them to give up eating to help me be brave. And I'll go to the king, and if I'm to die, then I'll die. Now, I don't know about you, but my experience is an observation. When we go through something hard, when we're dealing with tragedy, when we're dealing with the unfun stuff, it's natural for us to start asking all those questions of God. Why? 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 And at some point, on some level, the why questions just become uninteresting. And don't mishear me on this. I'm a big fan of, like, in the middle of tragedy, shaking our fist at God and saying, God, why? And this is the time we voice our frustration and our anger and our disappointment to God. And there's something really healing about that, right? But there's also something kind of unhealthy about staying there. And let's be honest with each other. Even if there were divine answers to such questions, would they really ever satisfy? I mean, if the divine could step down and somehow answer these questions and say, well, yeah, here's why he had to die. When he was in the 5th grade, he did this. And then again, when he was a senior in high school, he acted this way. And then when he grew to be older, he was pretty greedy. So, I had to send that terminal illness. Would that work for anyone? You see, I think the problem is we need a new paradigm, a new conception of God. Because so oftentimes when we think about God and ourselves, we have God way up here somewhere, we have humanity down here, and then we have bad things down here, further down here. And when these bad things come about, when they come up to us, we start crying out and up to God, God, why aren't you fixing it? Why aren't you stopping it? Why aren't you intervening on history? And it's a game changer. Everything changes when you see not God up here somewhere, but a God who's actually down here with us in the mess, going through the darkness with us. So I actually think a much more interesting question, at least for me, is why, when these bad things happen, when these tragedies come about, why do they have such a profound effect on us? Why do they affect us at all? It's like Wednesday afternoon when I went to the gym after hearing about yet another mass shooting. And I was at Westridge, and I was running around the track upstairs, and I thought, man, this is kind of strange, isn't it? Because I'm affected by this, and I don't know these people. I've never met them. I don't know their families. I don't know their friends and their community. I've never seen their faces, and yet it feels like this thing is just sitting right here. Perhaps we live in the echo of Mordecai's words to Esther. Don't you think for 1 minute this thing isn't going to affect you? We're all in this together. And whatever that thing is, a mass shooting, a cultural tragedy, a tragedy in our world, or maybe it's more personal. Maybe you have friends or family who deal with depression, or you wake up next to someone each day who battles addiction, or you come home each evening to someone who has some sort of illness. Have you ever had the sense that someone's suffering has something to do with you? Have you ever had the sense that an injustice over there somewhere has something to do with you? And that you need to act, not just because it's about alleviating their suffering, but it's also about alleviating yours too. I mean, have you ever had the sense that we're all one? In the New Testament, they talk about one Lord, one baptism. It's this profound sense of all humanity being in it together. Still in Orthodox traditions, they talk about the mystical body of Christ. Again, the sense that all humanity is one body. It's why for thousands of years the image of body has been so compelling to so many people, because it gives us the sense, the feeling that we're in it together. I mean, have you ever noticed, like during times of tragedy or during times of deep darkness, how Facebook posts blow up with things like, hug your kids a little tighter tonight, hold them a little longer, let people around you know that you love them and that they're valuable. Why? Because in the middle of darkness, we have this profound sense that life is fragile and life is sacred, and we're in it together. So, in light of Advent, in light of this story about Mordecai and Esther, what does it look like for us to be brave in our world today? Perhaps it's as simple as saying, yeah, these things, whatever these things are, they affect us. They have an effect on me. Or perhaps it's like saying, like Esther said, I can't do it alone. I need you all to help me be brave. I need you to stand with me. We're going through something hard together. Or perhaps it's realizing that light is possible. Light exists, but we first must go through the darkness together. Peace exists, but we first must go through the darkness. So I want to introduce you to someone this morning, Jenna Wesson. She's someone that I think is really brave. She's someone who models and demonstrates for us what it's like to go through darkness and to wait for some sort of light. She's one of our youth here at St. Luke's, and I encountered part of her story a couple of months ago on Facebook. She posted, I'll just read it, October 13th. She said, as some of you know, today's a special day for me. Today marks 1 year clean of self-harm. I wouldn't be here right now if it weren't for everyone I've met and everyone who supports me. Thank you so much. I love you all. Thanks for being so accepting and loving towards me. You're all amazing. She's going to share a small piece of her story about going through the darkness and discovering some light along the way. Thank you for being here, Jenna.
So a couple years ago, I was in a really dark place with depression and anxiety, but I kind of chose the easy way out, which is avoiding it and thinking that if I didn't accept it, it wasn't real. And that just drove me deeper to a point where I began self-harm. And at that point, I wasn't just hiding my own personal sadness, I was hiding my physical scars. And the reason was that no one understood. For example, if you tell your coach that you're hurt and you can't play, they'll be fine with it. But if you tell your teacher that you have social anxiety and you can't present in front of the class, then they'll just tell you that everyone gets nervous and that it'll be good for you. And for that reason, I was just terrified of reaching out and finding people to help me. And I was also scared of wasting people's time or money or for something that I just didn't know if it was real. And within that, I hit rock bottom and I was hospitalized for suicidal thoughts and self-harm. And that's when I realized that I was willing to do anything to be happy, including accepting that I wasn't okay. And through the process, I discovered a couple things. I discovered that I was worth so much more than anyone's time or money, and that I wasn't alone. In fact, 1 in 5 people in my generation have depression. And with that, I learned the power of group therapy. And this is because they've experienced it. They know what I'm talking about, and they won't think I'm crazy if I'm sad one day. And right now, I've been clean for 14 months, and I'm not looking to go back there. Thanks for listening to my story.
Thank you, Jenna. If you're wondering what it looks like to be brave in today's world, well, you just saw it. Walking through darkness and waiting for light and doing it together. Thanks again, Jenna.